My brother stole my inheritance after our father did, and my family covered it up until I exposed everything and left them with nothing but regret. I'm a 29-year-old guy. I always thought my family was fair. Until everything fell apart. Growing up, I was the responsible one, the kind of kid who mowed the lawn without being asked, helped my mom with bills, and stayed up late to help my little brother with homework, even when I was exhausted. I prided myself on being reliable, loyal, and the glue that kept our small family together. I never thought those qualities would make me a target. Our family always seemed normal to outsiders. But inside, the favoritism was subtle, constant, and draining. My younger brother, Luke, had a charm that made everyone overlook his flaws. Mom would gush over his little achievements, and Dad would smile indulgently whenever he got a good grade or scored in a game. All my successes were quietly acknowledged and then brushed aside. I didn't mind door, so I told myself I just wanted to keep peace, to maintain the fragile harmony that held us together. My father was a self-made man, a man who built everything from nothing, and I admired him more than anyone. He worked late nights, ran his own business, and still somehow had time to teach me the value of hard work. I always assumed that our shared loyalty, our dedication to the family, would be recognized. When he talked about the inheritance he planned to leave behind, I trusted that he would be fair. I believed that he would reward me for my sacrifices and my steadfastness. But even then, I noticed subtle things that made my stomach twist. Luke would casually say things like, "I could handle Dad's business better if he wasn't around, or I guess I'll just have to take care of everything someday." I laughed it off, told myself he was just joking, but a tiny nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. I went about my life, confident that when the time came, everything would unfold naturally and fairly. I never imagined that the one person I trusted most, my family, would be the same one standing in the way of what was rightfully mine. And yet, I had no idea how fast everything was about to unravel when my father passed away. Everything felt like it stopped. I remember the morning clearly, his favorite chair empty, coffee still warm on the counter, the quiet hum of the house that suddenly felt unbearably hollow. I should have been prepared. We all knew he was getting older, but death has a way of hitting you like a sucker punch. Luke was the first to start organizing things, telling Mom and me, "Don't worry, I'll handle Dad's affairs." At first, I nodded, thinking it was just his way of stepping up. But there was something in the way he said it, so casual, so certain that a small part of me tensed. The funeral was surreal. Everyone smiled, shook hands, and shared memories. But under the surface, there were currents I couldn't quite read. People whispered, not about Dad, but about who would take over what, who would get what. I felt myself shrinking into the background, watching Luke charm distant relatives and family friends with ease. I should have been proud of him, I suppose, but instead, I felt a creeping unease. A whisper in my gut that something wasn't right. A few days later, the talk turned to the inheritance. Dad had always been clear about being fair, leaving us each a share of what he had worked for. But when Luke spoke up, casually slipping comments like, "I think I can handle things better if you let me," my heart sank. Mom nodded, almost distractedly, as if agreeing out of habit. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just shock, just grief clouding everyone's judgment. Even then, subtle signs began to surface. Documents that should have been shared were lost or misplaced. Casual mentions of accounts or property were strangely vague, and Luke's charm seemed to shield him from any scrutiny. I trusted that everything would be sorted fairly, that my father's intentions would be honored. But a knot in my stomach kept tightening, whispering that trust alone might not be enough. I didn't know it yet. But the first seeds of betrayal were already planted, and they were growing faster than I could imagine. It started small. It's almost invisible at first. I noticed that some of the bank statements weren't where they were supposed to be, that emails about Dad's accounts went unanswered, and that Luke always seemed just a step ahead whenever I asked a question. At family gatherings, he'd flash that easy smile and joke, "Relax, I've got this covered," and everyone, including Mom, would nod like it was true. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But every time he said it, a tiny alarm bell rang in my head. Growing louder each day, I tried to bring it up casually, thinking maybe I was overreacting. "Hey, Luke, I noticed some paperwork missing. Do you know where it is?" I asked one evening while helping Mom sort through Dad's files. He leaned back, smirking, and said, "Relax. I've got all that handled. You don't want to stress yourself out over Dad's business. Trust me." His tone was playful, but I could feel the underlying condescension. It stung more than I expected. It's like being pushed aside by someone you thought had your back. Mom chimed in without looking up from her tablet. "Don't worry, honey. Luke knows what he's doing. You don't have to stress." Her voice was gentle, but I could hear the dismissal in it. I clenched my fists inside my pocket, my stomach twisting. I'd spent my whole life being cautious, responsible, and fair, yet here I was, watching my brother maneuver with such ease while my concerns were quietly brushed aside. I started paying closer attention, noticing things I hadn't before. Late-night calls Luke hurriedly ended when I entered the room. Unexplained withdrawals and transfers on statements I happened to catch. Small property documents signed without my knowledge. Each discovery tightened the knot in my chest. I wanted to confront him, to demand honesty, but I didn't have enough proof. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Yet I felt trapped, caught between trusting my family and acknowledging the first real cracks in everything. I thought I knew. I didn't know how deep it went yet, but I could already feel the walls closing in, and I had a sinking sense that the storm I'd been ignoring was about to hit me full force. The first undeniable proof hit me like a punch I wasn't ready for. I was going through some old account statements Dad had kept in his study when I noticed it, an unauthorized transfer from one of his accounts straight into Luke's name. My hands shook as I traced the numbers again and again, hoping I had misread something. But the math was clear. He had taken a portion of what was rightfully mine. I felt my stomach drop and my chest tighten. Betrayal doesn't hit gradually. It explodes all at once. I confronted him, trying to keep my voice calm. "Luke, why is there a transfer from Dad's account in your name?" I asked, sliding the statement across the kitchen table. He leaned back in his chair, letting a slow grin spread across his face. "Oh, that? Don't worry about it. Dad wanted someone responsible handling things, and I guess I stepped in." His tone was casual, like this was no big deal, like he'd done me a favor. I stared at him, disbelief and anger warring inside me. "You stole it. You knew it wasn't yours," I spat. Mom wandered into the room just then, and instead of defending me, she shrugged. "Don't be dramatic. Luke knows what he's doing. You should just relax," she said softly, almost tenderly. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. The people I trusted most were siding with him, normalizing his theft, gaslighting me into feeling like I was overreacting. I had spent years believing in fairness, in honesty, in family, and now every principle I held dear was being shredded right in front of me. I couldn't sleep that night. The house felt colder, emptier, and I could almost hear Dad's voice echoing, reminding me to be patient, to be reasonable. But how could I reason with betrayal? How could I reconcile love for family with the knowledge that they were actively covering for a thief? I realized then that this wasn't just about money. It was about trust, respect, and the family I thought I knew. And deep down, I sensed that the real fight was just beginning. It was going to get worse before it got better. After that night, the atmosphere at home shifted. I could feel it in every glance, every hushed conversation that stopped the moment I walked by. Luke acted as if nothing had happened. Charming Mom, Dad's old friends, even our neighbors. While I felt invisible, like I was the intruder in my own family, it was maddening watching him flaunt the inheritance he had taken. While the people I trusted dismissed my anger as overthinking, I tried to bring it up again, more forcefully this time. "Mom, this isn't normal. He transferred money that wasn't his. This isn't just a mistake." She looked at me with that familiar, tired expression, the one that always made me question myself. "Honey, he's just trying to help. You're letting grief cloud your judgment," she said. The words cut me deeper than any insult. Even in my father's absence, his legacy was being twisted. My parents were silently approving it. Luke started pushing the boundaries further. He bought a new car Dad's favorite model without saying a word, showing off in ways he knew would provoke me. He'd casually mention trips, investments, or purchases, all under the guise of handling things for the family. Every word, every gesture, was a reminder that he'd taken control and no one cared enough to stop him. I began to notice patterns I had missed before. Certain documents would go missing right after I tried to check them. Phone calls were abruptly ended when I entered a room. Even extended family members started treating me differently, subtly siding with Luke without ever saying why. It was like everyone was in on some secret I wasn't allowed to know. I started doubting myself, wondering if I was imagining things. But deep down I knew the truth. Luke had stolen from me, and my family had covered it up. The anger was simmering, but I realized I couldn't act without proof. I had to watch, document, and plan, and yet every day I stayed quiet. The more I realized that staying silent might be the worst mistake of my life. Something had to give, and I knew it was coming. That's when I found the hidden accounts. I wasn't looking for them, at least not consciously. I had started going through old papers Dad had left in his office, trying to make sense of everything. And there it was, a folder tucked behind a stack of legal documents, labeled in Dad's handwriting but with details I'd never seen before. Multiple bank accounts, property deeds, even investment portfolios, all quietly funneled under Luke's name. My stomach turned over. At first I couldn't breathe. I kept rereading the numbers, trying to convince myself it was a mistake. But the pattern was undeniable. Every transfer, every property that Dad had painstakingly built had been redirected. And the worst part? Mom and Dad had known. I stumbled upon letters and note states, amounts, confirmations where my parents had acknowledged Luke's responsibility in handling things. They had covered it all up, silently enabling him, while pretending to mourn Dad. I felt sick, betrayed in a way I hadn't imagined possible. My brother, who I'd tried to support, protect, and guide, had been manipulating everyone. My own parents had allowed it. Rage and disbelief collided inside me. The quiet charm Luke wielded so effortlessly had become a weapon, and my family had all but handed him the bullets. I realized then that I couldn't just confront him and hope for fairness. This was bigger than money. It was a complete breach of trust. I needed evidence, meticulous proof, every transfer, every signature, every hidden account. I couldn't let them get away with this, not when my father's legacy and my own future were on the line. Sitting in Dad's empty office, I felt a shift inside me, a cold clarity. The betrayal had been exposed to me, and now I knew I had the power to expose it to the world. But with that power came danger. Luke was clever, and my parents had already proven they'd protect him. I clenched my fists, staring at the papers. I knew I was standing on the edge of a storm, and once I stepped forward, there would be no turning back. From that moment, I became obsessed with gathering proof. Every spare hour was spent digging through documents, scanning emails, cross-checking bank statements, and tracking property deeds. I started taking detailed note states, amounts, signatures, and even inconsistencies in Luke's explanations. Each discovery made my stomach churn, but also sharpened my resolve. I couldn't confront him yet. I needed airtight evidence that would leave him no room to lie. Luke began to notice subtle changes in me. I caught him watching me more closely during family dinners, lingering a little too long when I went through Dad's files, and sending quick, tense glances at Mom. It was a dangerous game. He had the charm, the family's trust, and the freedom to manipulate perception, while I had only suspicion and scraps of proof. But I had the patience and the determination he lacked. Late nights were the worst. I'd sit in Dad's old study, the house silent except for the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Papers spread out like a battlefield around me. I could almost feel Dad's presence, as if he were silently urging me to keep going. I thought of every sacrifice I'd made, every time I stayed quiet to keep peace, and I let the anger fuel me. I even started discreetly reaching out to a few of Dad's old business contacts, people who might corroborate transactions or clarify accounts. Everything had to be methodical. A single misstep and Luke could spin the story against me, painting me as greedy or unstable. The stakes were higher than ever. My inheritance, my reputation, and my sense of justice were all hanging in the balance. And yet, despite all the late nights and careful planning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time the door creaked or Luke's laughter echoed from the living room, my heart skipped a beat. I knew he was on to me, that he sensed the storm I was preparing, and I realized the next step would be dangerous, and once I made it, there would be no turning back. Finally, I confronted him. I didn't yell. I didn't cry, at least not yet. I walked into the living room where Luke was scrolling on his phone, casually lounging as if he owned the place. I held up a stack of papers, statements, and deeds, each one meticulously highlighted. "Luke, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but cold. He looked up, eyebrows raised, and a slow smirk crossed his face. "Oh, about what exactly?" I slid the documents across the coffee table. "These, the transfers, the accounts, the properties. Don't bother lying, I know everything. All of it." For a moment he didn't move, just stared at the evidence like it wasn't real. Then, as if rehearsed, he leaned back and said, "You're overreacting. Dad trusted me with this. You should be grateful I'm taking care of it." Felt my chest tighten, anger and disbelief blending into a bitter cocktail. "Grateful? You stole from me. From Dad, and you've been covering it up this entire time. Mom knows, and you know it," I shot back, my hands trembling slightly as I gestured toward the papers. Mom appeared in the doorway, glancing nervously between us. "Honey, maybe you're being harsh," she said softly. But there was no conviction behind her voice, only fear roar, maybe guilt. My stomach dropped further. The people I thought I could rely on, my own family, were still protecting him, still trying to make me the villain in all of this. Luke's smirk faltered slightly, just enough for me to see a flicker of panic. "You don't have proof," he muttered under his breath, as if hoping to intimidate me. But I did. Every bank transfer, every deed, every signature, I had it all. I realized then that the confrontation wasn't just about exposing him. It was about reclaiming control, taking back what was mine, and showing my family the consequences of their silence. And even though I had the proof, I could feel the storm building, knowing that the fallout was going to be far worse than anything I had faced so far that night. Everything hit rock bottom. Luke didn't take the confrontation quietly. He retaliated in the worst possible way. By morning, half the family, even distant relatives, had started whispering, "Are you sure you're handling this right? Maybe you're overreacting." Suddenly I was the villain, the troublemaker, the one causing tension. While Luke sat back and played the victim perfectly, I felt the walls of my own home closing in, suffocating me with disbelief. Mom and Dad, who I had trusted implicitly, seemed to bend toward him without hesitation. Every conversation ended with, "He's just trying to help. Give him a chance." As if my careful evidence and reasoning meant nothing. I had spent my entire life trying to uphold family values, being the responsible one. And now I was being gaslit by the very people who were supposed to support me. The anger in me was raw and unfiltered, mingled with a deep, crushing sadness I hadn't felt since Dad died. Luke didn't just sit back quietly either. He started spreading rumors, subtly framing me as greedy, obsessed with money, and unstable. Family friends asked me questions that were clearly prompted by him. And even people outside the house gave me side eyes, as if I were the problem. It was cruel and meticulous. He had weaponized perception, and my family's silence amplified it. I remember sitting alone in Dad's old study that night, the house dark except for a single lamp on the desk. The papers were there, the proof of everything, but proof doesn't stop emotional betrayal, doesn't heal the feeling of being utterly alone in the world. I wanted to scream, to run, to throw everything into the fire and walk away. But somewhere deep inside, a fire lit. I refused to let him win. I knew that if I didn't act, I'd lose not just the inheritance, but my dignity, my future, and the chance to reclaim the life I deserved. And that's when I realized I couldn't fight him quietly anymore. Something had to change, and soon. I decided it was time to expose everything. I couldn't sit back and let Luke rewrite history, and I couldn't let my parents' silence protect him anymore. Over the next few days, I meticulously organized the evidence. I'd been gathering bank statements, property deeds, emails, even voice recordings where he admitted transactions to friends. I double-checked every detail, knowing that a single mistake could let him twist the narrative against me. I started quietly reaching out to extended family and Dad's old business contacts, the ones who had known his intentions and could verify accounts and properties. Each conversation confirmed my worst fears. Luke had been siphoning assets. My parents had been complicit, turning a blind eye while presenting a united front to the outside world. The sense of betrayal was sharp, like a knife twisting in my chest, but it also strengthened my resolve. Finally, the confrontation became public. I called a family meeting, the kind we hadn't had since Dad passed. Everyone gathered in the living room, Mom fidgeting, Luke smirking, confident he could charm his way out, and distant relatives watching curiously. I calmly laid out every piece of evidence. I have proof of every transfer, every property misappropriated, and every account manipulated, I said. And yes, Mom and Dad, this includes knowledge you had of it. Luke's smug expression faltered as murmurs rippled through the room. He tried to talk over me, to spin excuses, but I had anticipated it. I calmly walked everyone through the paper trail, the accounts, the emails, and the undeniable facts. The shift in the room was immediate. The whispers turned to gasps, and the color drained from my parents' faces. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of power and clarity. The truth was out, raw and undeniable. But even with the exposure, I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about forcing my family to confront the choices they had made, and ensuring they couldn't hide behind lies anymore. And as I watched Luke scramble, trying to salvage whatever dignity he could, I realized the real reckoning was just beginning. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Luke couldn't charm his way out this time. Every transfer, every hidden account, every property misappropriation had been documented and verified. The family that once silenced me now had nowhere to hide. I watched as his smug confidence crumbled, replaced by panic and anger. This isn't fair. You can't prove, he started, but the room was already against him. Every word, every excuse fell flat. Mom and Dad looked shell-shocked, their usual calm and authority stripped away. The reality of their complicity was laid bare, and I could see the guilt washing over them. They had enabled him, covered for him, and now the consequences were unavoidable. The people who had questioned my motives now looked at Luke with disbelief and disgust. Every friend, every relative who had ever admired his charm now saw the truth. He had stolen from the person who had always been loyal, the one who had sacrificed for the family. The sense of vindication was overwhelming. I felt the tension inside me release in slow, satisfying waves. It wasn't joy. Not entirely. Betrayal leaves scars that don't just vanish, but it was justice. Luke's face was pale as he realized there was no way to spin this, no way to avoid the consequences he had earned. The legal paperwork I had already arranged ensured he wouldn't keep a single cent, and the humiliation in front of the family was something he'd never forget. For the first time since Dad passed, I felt control over my life again. I had reclaimed what was mine, and in doing so, I had exposed the truth that everyone else had tried to hide. My parents' regret was palpable, their silence loud and crushing. It was their choice to protect him, not me. Sitting back, I let it sink in. The house was quiet, tense, but I could finally breathe. I knew the final step, moving on, truly leaving the toxic dynamics behind, was coming. But before that, I allowed myself one moment to feel the full weight of justice served. After everything was exposed, I knew it was time to reclaim my life fully. The house that had once felt like a prison now felt different, almost hollow, but in a freeing way. Luke had lost everything: money, credibility, respect, and my parents were left to wrestle with their guilt and regret. For the first time, I felt the weight of their choices lifting from my shoulders. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done being trapped in their manipulations. I started rebuilding quietly. I moved some of Dad's assets into accounts I controlled, made plans for my future, and reached out to the few family members and friends who had remained supportive. It was slow, methodical, and deliberate, but it felt right. I could finally make decisions without fear of interference or manipulation. The relief was profound. like breathing for the first time after being underwater for years. Emotionally, it was strange. The anger had faded, replaced by a mix of sorrow and empowerment. I grieved not just for Dad, but for the family I thought I had, what I lost, what could have been. Yet there was satisfaction too. The people who had betrayed me had to confront the consequences of their choices. Regret became their constant companion, and for once, I didn't have to carry that weight. I realized something important. Life isn't about revenge or proving a point, it's about reclaiming your power, your dignity, and your future. I had done that. I had walked through betrayal, deception, and isolation and come out stronger. The house was quiet that evening. I sat in Dad's study, looking out the window at the garden he had built with his own hands. And for the first time, I felt peace. I wasn't defined by my brother's lies, or my parents' silence, or even the inheritance. I was defined by what I chose to do with it, and now I could finally step into my own life, free from the shadows of their mistakes. And as I closed the door behind me for the last time, I knew I had left the past exactly where it belonged, behind me.